So, I have not been doing well, but I don't want to talk about me and how I'm not doing well. Because it's not only me that's not doing well. It's not only me, it's also my family. A lot of people in my family are not doing well right now. But more than that, a lot of my friends aren't doing well right now. And one of my friends, who also noticed this, suggested and he told me that he's miserable because everybody is in a miserable place right now. And I'm open to exceptions. You might be in a good place, and I'll get into why I think there might be exceptions. But I think that right now, specifically, there is a collective, so to speak, obstacle that is preventing, at least right now, um, a large number of us from progressing in a certain sense. And I mean, I could be projecting, but I don't think I am, and I'll explain why. Uh, First of all, let me say that I go through a lot of cups, just typically as a person. I mean, in the kitchen in my family's house, I will like go through 5 cups a day. But what's interesting is that not everybody does that. But also, what's interesting about me is that I pace a lot. I pace a lot. And I paced so much the other day that I actually gave myself a blister, and that's kind of silly and kind of funny, but and then the other thing that's related to this in a way that I'll tie together in just a minute is that, as you can maybe hear, there are 3 cockatiels in my room right now. There used to be 4 a week ago, but we've sold the 4th one, and we're going to sell the 3rd one. But in any case, what these 3 cases exhibit is the same structure, and this structure, specifically the structure of a mismatch between what I care about and the things that provide the means for my caring about them. So, for instance, with the cups, it's that I care about water. I need to drink water, but I don't care about the means to get the water, which is the cup. So I go through a lot of them. In the same way, when I pace, I need kind of a proprioceptive stimulation or whatever I'm thinking about at the time. And I don't care about the means to get me there, which is the state of my body and like the skin of my foot or whatever. And like with the cockatiels, I care about the cockatiels, but I am not caring about the means to get the cockatiels, which is the cage, which is a little full right now. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make with that is that by looking at all these areas of my life, you can kind of discern a central structure, which is the structure of my character. And this structure of my character is, to put it bluntly, is a mismatch between content and container. And that's autism, by the way, in a certain sense. But it's other things too. But it's like it's a mismatch between what I care about and the means for me to get there, or rather, a mismatch between content and container, between end and means. That's another way to put it, or between feeling and thinking. That's the way you think. That's the way you can think about it. So, saying that, I think it's interesting and a way to look at this kind of collective obstacle, this collective depression, as it were, as that I'm intuiting. A way you could look at it is that it is, in a certain sense, in the same way that my going through cups reflect my character, the collective actions and the collective relational dynamics that are reflected in individual dynamics is reflective also of, I would say, an event, like you are event, that is kind of seething beneath the surface right now, that is reflected and instantiated in all sorts of different places according to people's individual character. And so let me give an example of what that would look like. This is a book right here. It's called Lectures on Jung's Typology. And there's this fascinating quote that I've referenced before with people, where Marie-Louise von Franz, who's the author of this section of the book, she's giving a lecture, is talking about why the Nazis succeeded in the 30s. And she gives a fascinating answer. She says, every German I knew at that time who fell for Nazism did so on account of his inferior function. And now, if you looked at Myers-Briggs or whatever, or Jungian typology, what the inferior function is it's the opposite complement to your strength, to your psychological strength. So if you're an intuitive type, if you're really into ideas or exploration, like I am, the inferior function would be sensation, and so you indulge or you neglect yourself, things like that, in areas of concrete reality. If you're a feeling type, your weak point will be thinking, which means that you will make kind of bad judgments in the intellectual sphere. And if you're thinking type, will mean you'll make bad feeling judgments, something like that. But she's going to explain what that means in the context of Nazism. The feeling type got caught by the stupid arguments of the party doctrine. The intuitive type got caught by his dependence on money. He could not give up his job and did not see how he could deal with the money problem, so he had to stay in it despite the fact that he did not agree, and so on. The inferior function was in each personal realm the door where some of the collective evil could accumulate, or you could say that each one who had not worked on his inferior function contributed to this general disaster in a small way, but the sum of millions of inferior functions constitutes an enormous devil. Propaganda against the Jews was very cleverly made up in that respect. For example, the Jews were insulted as being destructive intellectuals, which completely convinced all the feeling types, a projection of inferior thinking, or they were accused of being reckless moneymakers. That completely convinced the intuitive, for they were his inferior sensation, and no one knew where the devil was. The propaganda used the ordinary suspicions that people had against others on account of their inferior function. So you can say that behind each individual, the fourth function is not just a little kind of deficiency. The sum of these is really responsible for a tremendous amount of trouble. And so I found that fascinating, because it's saying how much a collective disaster like the Nazi phenomenon in Germany could come about as a result of a collective refusal to look at what we don't want to look at. And what she's saying is that this collective refusal to look at what we don't want to look at is the event that got manifested physically as the rise of the Nazi Party. And so the Nazi Party, in that sense, is, and the Nazi phenomenon in World War II and the Holocaust and everything that came afterwards, right, is a refusal to look at our weak spots. What is the opposite pole of what we are consciously doing, i.e., the seething wave of unconscious compensation that is struggling to make itself manifest in and through us, i.e., the repressed unconscious, so to speak. But in regard to what's going on right now, I think you could say that it's very similar in that sense, because what I think it's that I'm an intuitive type, and so what I found recently is that it's almost like my capacity to function in sensory concrete ways has been inhibited more than it normally is. And what I found is that, or actually what I suspect is that, and as another example, it's like on conflict has conflict reached a new tenor? But in any case, it's like, it seems that just based on an intuition, which could be wrong, I guess, the personality structures of everybody and the personality lopsidedness of everybody is being exaggerated, because, and this is what I suspect, the opposite pole of that personality structure is making itself known now more than ever, and our collective response to that, which isn't good, is to ignore it. And that is causing obstacles and potential catastrophe. Another way to say this is that this collective event, you are event, with the letters, not you are an event. You are an event, but that's true too, but that's not what I mean. This collective event is the act of is the act of, how do I say this? Because Rudolf Steiner, the guy that I study, he said that in 1899 specifically, there was the beginning of what he calls the influx of a wave of strife, a flood of what our culture hadn't integrated, that was inflowing into the culture, that at that point was then rejected by that culture, which caused all sorts of problems, including and not limited to World War I and everything that came out as a result of that, like World War II, the Cold War, the Holocaust, that kind of thing. And so he's really saying the same thing as Jung in this sense, which is that there is a flood inflowing into our culture of what we don't want to look at, of what would make us whole if we looked at it and if we accepted it, that because we reject it, makes us reject everything that reminds us of what would bring us our wholeness, which is most specifically whoever we think is an enemy. So what that means is that and the fact that this has reached a new critical mass is meaning that the revelation of that wave of strife or whatever, that unconscious potential for wholeness, is reaching is that revelation, the potential for that revelation is very, very closer than it's ever been. And that could mean a lot of things, obviously. Close. We're always closer than we've ever been, but I feel like we've reached a new threshold. And so what that would mean is that in order to get past the obstacle that is preventing you from being you in the fullest sense, and what that means is that it's preventing you from living your life as yourself, not in a way that would make you necessarily unsocial, but would actually let true sociality happen for the first time. Like Jung said, that like we're often selfish in the community. We're often selfish communally, and communal individually, and that's not the way it should be. We should be single in the individual and communal with respect to the community. But it's opposite nowadays. But and that's actually what Swedenborg says is the original meaning of Adam being alone before Eve was there. And it's complicated, but like, but anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that wholeness, that singleness, that allows, that individuation that allows true sociality and connection is possible and will come, to the extent that we accept our dark sides, what we don't want to look at, and make them part of us. And how do you do that? How do you do that? Well, for me, what it looks like is using 1 cup a day. There's an old, how do I put this? There's an old, like you've heard of the Emerald Tablet, right? The Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, or if you haven't heard of that, you've heard of the Law of Attraction, right? The movie The Secret. The idea that if you intend something to happen and you really want something to happen, and you like act as if it's going to happen, it will happen. And that's true. That's very, very true. But it has a structure that isn't often gone into by the New Age types, which is that, and the reason why it's the case is because insofar as you act like something is the case, not only you will pick up and act and start to believe that it's the case and reinforce that belief and that action that comes from that belief, but other people will too. And they'll start to give you evidence based on that belief that comes from their watching you. And I think that the universe seems to function on that principle, which is that, and this is how evolution works, right, is that things tend to align with the behavior of things in their environment on a micro and macro level, on every level, right? And so what that means is that if you want to change the world, first of all, you change yourself, right? But how you change yourself is by changing an aspect of your life that reflects the central dynamic that you want to change in yourself on the smallest, easiest level. And then it will trickle out. This is what Jordan Peterson is trying to say when he says you have to clean your room. Because if you clean your room, you're really not just bringing order to chaos, but you're taking care of that which belongs to you, and therefore healing the split between the part of us that is conscious and the part of us that is neglected and has become chaotic as a result, too chaotic in a sense. Yeah. So what I would do is I would use 1 cup a day, and what that would mean is that I would respect not only the thing that I'm caring about, but the thing that helps me get to what I'm caring about. So I'm not only caring about the end, but also the means. And in Swedenborgian logic, that is the divine marriage between goodness, the end, and the means, which is the truth. Goodness and truth, and that's the conjugal love. That's the divine marriage. And so what that would mean is that I would become a whole person. If I were to do that, it would, first of all, like I'd use 1 cup, right? And then maybe because I'm using 1 cup, I wouldn't clutter the kitchen, right? And so the kitchen would be less messy. And then if I do that, maybe what would happen is that since the kitchen is less messy, I assume, and if I do that in maybe other areas too, I would assume that maybe I'm less of a messy person than I have habitually assumed myself to be, and maybe that would become part of my self-concept, and then maybe I would start to act in that way. And it's that kind of dynamic. And maybe other people would see that too, and they'd reinforce that behavior. And so what that means is that if you want to solve the collective obstacle and the collective depression that seems to be setting in right now, and I mean, I could be projecting, obviously, like I said, but it seems like that's the case, and if you're listening to this so far, you think it is the case. If you want to solve that, find an example, a concrete example in your actions that is an instantiation of your weakness in the areas of your personality that you've neglected, and fix that in that area only. And then let it trickle out. And then if you do that, it will cause a chain reaction. And the reason the reason I mentioned the Emerald Tablet is because it's something that the law of attraction people reference often. But one thing it says is that something like as above, so below, or something like that. It's like everything that happens on one level happens on other levels. And the fascinating thing is that it says something to the effect, I don't remember the exact words, that this is the only knowledge you need to accomplish miracles. And that's true. That's very, very true. If you want to create cultural change, the way you do it is not by protesting, because protesting reinforces the attitudes of the person you're protesting, often because they are trying to attack the thing that you stand for in the first place, and so they're going to be reinforced as the enemy of you. And not protest does nothing more than reinforce the dynamic that is being played out, and it reinforces the strength of both sides. And so protest doesn't fix anything. In fact, if it seems to, it's because the side that wins has assumed some of the character of the side that it has defeated. And so the oppression dynamics will never go away. And this is another point entirely, but it's related because oppression is repression, right? Because what we see in the person we repress is what we fear. Oppression dynamics will never go away until we integrate into ourselves the character of the people we're fighting, or what we see in them and why we hate them. And I suspect that happens first and foremost, and firstly only, on the individual level. So clean your room in that sense if you have a messy room, or if you have too clean of a room, get your room dirty. It's that principle, it's the idea that if you have a one-sided personality, and we all do, act in a local, instantiated way, as if you had a whole personality in that area. So I'm going to use 1 cup a day, and you can do what you want to do, and we're going to change the world, I guess, if that works. So that's that, I guess.